Hey guys, KyleAye here, bringing you guys SPL Draft Notes Week 3, the show about anything and everything SPL related. If you guys are excited for this week's episode of SPL, we'll go over last week's games, this week's games, and we'll even have a fun interview in the middle here with Mr. CBAD. Please be sure to drop a like on the video as well as subscribe to the channel. We're on our way to 5,000 subs by the end of the year, and I would really appreciate it if you help me out along that journey. And yeah, with that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into last week's results. Alrighty, looking at last week's games, first up we'll look at Chimpact versus Kyle, which is wrong on the graphic, I'm just now noticing, but Kyle was actually able to take home a very convincing 5-0 victory on the back of Latios, going absolutely crazy, setting up, never getting crit, and going absolutely to work on Chimpact's squad. So really convincing win and bounce back win for Kyle. Then we have Leo versus Shuckleking, the Carolina Hackers versus the Philadelphia Stunkies. Leo, another kind of team effort type game, but what in particular stood out to me was how much work his lead Tinkaton put in. Getting up rocks, knocking off items, and encoring in things forever, and kind of getting some really nice KOs. The Custap Berry coming out clutch as well and being a really solid addition. Clicking the play rough on the Custap was really aggressive, but the Tinkaton definitely went crazy and set up the rest of the game to where things like the Scarf Iron Bundle and the Ogre Pawn could put in some decent work. Then, speaking of team effort games, we have Gator versus Nexus, and a nice 2-0 victory for Gator. The definition of a team win. Every single member on his team that came got a KO in that match, so that was actually pretty cool to see. You don't see that very often. We have ShadyPenguin versus CBAD last week, with Shady getting his win in his return, or his first win in his return to Draft League on the back of Azelf picking up 3 KOs, doing really well. Lots of yellow magic. Shady was able to position well and was able to take home a dub in a really offensive game against CBAD and his Sun team. Then we have Emvee versus Haydunn. Again, pretty solid team effort across the board for Emvee, but in particular that Raging Bolt put in a lot of work, living a lot of hits on really low, still dishing out decent damage and bringing home a win. On the next game, we have PlayMore Esports versus Joey Pokeaimmd, and Pokeaimmd able to take home a nice and solid 5-0 victory on the back of Terra Fire Arboliva of all Pokemon. A whole 4 points that thing costed, and it absolutely went to work on what's arguably the best Draft League team, or the best team in this draft. So really solid, convincing win from Joey, moving him to 2-0 on the season. And then lastly, we have TheUziGunner versus Drewby. Uzi taking home a nice and solid 4-0 victory on the back of Custap Berry, Rotom Fan. Lots of Custaps this week, and they all really did put in a lot of work. So definitely a really cool one to see. You can see our pick'em score for the season moves up to 10-4. I'd like to stay above 500, but hopefully get to about 75% correct. Remember, we are only ranking these matchups based on who I think will win on team matchup alone. I'm not really diving into perceived player skill or anything like that, but hopefully we'll keep analyzing these matchups correctly and keep guessing right, I guess, or educated guessing right. But that is going to be the recap for last week. We go ahead and jump on into the first game. First up, we got to talk about Shady versus Drewby in this week. Now, from Shady's side, I think that Sneasler goes absolutely insane. Where there's a Sneasler, there is a way, as they say. And I think with a Sword Stance up, this thing can absolutely go to town against this team. I think a big roadblock is going to be that Sandaconda on Drewby's side, but if we can force some damage on that thing, or put ourselves in a position where we're not super worried about the Sandaconda, whether it be the Grassy Seed, maybe a bulk up variant, but I really think you're probably going to be White Herb CC, you can absolutely go to town at +2, get your Unburden, and just kind of win the game. It really does do incredibly well. I think Landorus is going to be solid as a Iron Boulder pivot. Now you do have to be careful about certain variants of Boulder, but it's a great check to that, as well as Pokemon like Thunders on the opposing side, and even in a pinch, something like the Rillaboom. I think there's going to be another week that Shady brings special Lando, which is funny because the first 2 weeks I thought there was an argument for not being special, and this week I think you definitely want to either be Scorching Sands or Earth Power into the Rillaboom matchup, but also that makes it a little bit weaker into Boulder, depending on how things go. So maybe you go physical with Stomping Tantrum, accounting for that Rillaboom. So yeah, just things to keep in mind, obviously, from Shady's side. I think Emvee or Charlton also looks very solid. Either Emvee or Choppleberry both look solid. Trouble because I think the coverage move of choice on the Boulder will probably be Close Combat, and it also covers Quackleval, Low Kicking Rillaboom, things like that, Focus Blasting Thundy. So I think probably Choppleberry or an Assault Vest is really well. Has great offensive coverage in the opposing team. You can either go special or even like a physical Swords Dance set can put on a lot of pressure, maybe forcing that Sandaconda, get a lot of damage off on it so that your Sneasler can go to town. So definitely a really solid option. I think that Fairy Magmortar or just Terra Fire looks really strong. Fire plus ground is always going to be very strong, and Fire Fairy Ground is also very, very strong here. There's an argument for both. I think you go Fairy as a more defensive option. I think Fire is really immediately threatening to a lot of the things on the opposing side, so really just kind of depends on what route you want to go with Magmortar here, but regardless, I think you bring it as your Terramon. And then I think Rotom Wash probably comes for Quavo, whether it be a physically defensive variant or a fast Choice Scarf Max HP variant to always outspeed +1 Quavo and kill it with a Thunderbolt, a Volt Switch, whatever it might be. Deal with it that way, as well as outpacing a lot of the annoying threats like a non-booster Boulder or a Thundurus, things like that, you know, it could be nice to outspeed, or like fast Heatrans and stuff like that, but yeah. Now, from Drewby's side, I think that Boulder looks incredibly strong. We already talked about Landers being a check, but there are options around that. We can either go a Shuckleberry variant, absolutely eat up anything it wants to do, and set up a second Swords Dance as we click the first one coming in. Then we're at +3 with a little bit of chip. Landers ain't living that Mighty Cleave or whatever the move is called. Or you can go a Clear Amulet set and just click a Mighty Cleave the first time and then SD the second time and win the game. Booster is obviously also an option to, you know, be faster than everything with a Scarf, but you actually outspeed all of Shady's team naturally, and there aren't a ton of immediately threatening Scarfers in my opinion. Again, maybe Rotom, but you won't die to one Rotom. And other than that, there's not really anything that's threatening in my opinion. So I think some kind of SD Boulder looks great. I think Banded Rilla forces a ton of progress into this team. Really the only check is going to be something like Archaludon, and if you have something in the back for that, you can kind of come in, click Grassy Glide, Woodhammer, potentially a random low kick here or there, and it forms a really solid Volt Turn or Momentum Core with the rest of the squad, in particular something like Quaquaval. I think a Choice Band Quaquaval also looks really strong into this opposing team, mainly because I really like the Choice Band Aqua Jet option, and something like Sneasler, into something like Landorus, into something like Azelf, and something like Zoroark is a great revenge tool, but as well as Banded Aqua Step or Close Combat is going to be a nuke to whatever tries to come in. Banded Close Combat in particular seems very free. The Fighting Resist do not switch into water moves on this team, so you can kind of click Close Combat pretty freely. I think that's a really cool option. You could realistically just go Dual Stabs, Close Combat, Aqua Step, U-Turn, Aqua Jet, and do a ton of damage to the opposing side. And Sandaconda's got to come to check the Sneasler, also soft checks things like Landorus and other physical threats on the opposing side. And then I think Heatran also gets rocks up and checks Azel / a non-ground move Archaludon. The reason I mentioned SD earlier is because it does get Stomping Tantrum / like Earthquake, which can potentially just nuke through Heatran. Otherwise, it's the best way hitting you is like Body Press and Aura Sphere, and you can definitely go Choppleberry for that. You can also go Shuckle if you're feeling a little bit more worried, but I think Chopple's probably the play. But I am going to take Drewby in this game over Shady. I think his offense is just a little bit more overwhelming than Shady's, and I think Shady has a tough time finding the positions to win with something like Sneasler, because a lot of his offense is a little bit more mediocre this week. So we're going to go Drewby here. For game 2, we have Shuckleking and his Philadelphia Stunkies against Haydunn and his Colorado Rapid Spin. Now, from Shuckle's side, I think there's a SD Greninja angle here. I think he kind of struggles with 4 Moonsault Syndrome just a little bit, but I think Water Poison Fighting does really well into Haydunn's team. We could also just go 4 attacks, but I think if you could chip down something like Gyarados into, you know, a +2 Gung Shot range, or a +1 Gung Shot if you are a Swords Dance set, you can really go to town, and otherwise the coverage is really incredible. And if we get a Battle Bond boost, we're going to get another +1 to that attack, as well as a +1 to our speed, and outspeed the few things that do outpace us, things like Jolteon, things like Darkrai, and things like that. So if you do find that opportunity, I think that a Battle Bond SD Gren is going to have another really solid week. Speaking of another thing that doesn't have any switch-ins, I guess that wasn't the greatest segue in the world, but I'll distract you with that terrible segue by mentioning Baxcalibur, because I'd like you to point out the Ice Resist on Haydunn's team. Okay, it's Beartic, which doesn't really count as an Ice Resist, honestly. So, effectively, there is no Ice Resist. I think a Choice Band set in particular is really good. I don't know if I particularly like Swords Dance or Dragon Dance, unless you're going like a screens route to potentially facilitate that. Other than that, I feel like you come in, you click Icicle Crash / Icicle Spear, and you do a ton of damage to whatever wants to come in. You also tech on moves like Glaive Rush that can absolutely nuke through potential pivots and checks and things like that, but realistically, you just click Icicle Crash and Ice Shard to pick things off. Maybe you rock Low Kick or, you know, Earthquake for, you know, the few Pokemon that take super effective damage from it, but again, I'm just clicking Icicle Crash, man, and it does a ton of damage. I think CM or AV Blood Moon also goes absolutely stupid. AV might be the move, and so that you have a pivot into something like Darkrai. You're going to take a lot of damage from Focus Blast, but I think they had to click Focus Blast twice to 2-hit KO you, like once on the switch-in, so that's something to keep in mind. I love E-button hattering into the blacks on something like a Gliscor, right? Because we block potential hazards from coming our way, or we don't take that much damage from like an EQ, a Facade, a knockoff, whatever it might be. I guess not knockoff, because I guess it would knock off your item. But if you take an EQ, you bounce back hazards, whatever it might be, you get that free switch into something like Baxcalibur and you pick a KO. And you're also, again, very anti-hazard, which I like. It also soft checks and loses 1 from like basically everything on this team. It checks the Hitmontop very well, which I definitely think comes for the likes of Greninja plus Bax, whether it be a Technician or an Intimidate set. So definitely a really strong Pokemon. And I think Bronzong serves as a solid pivot and rocker in this game. It could also be Iron Defense Body Press. I think like a Colbur set in general is still good regardless. And you could be SD, or not SD, Stealth Rock, Iron Defense Body Press in this matchup pretty viably in my opinion. So definitely a really, really solid Pokemon. There's also other great Pokemon on the team. I think Lamore can set up solid hazards. I think Pelipper is actually pretty strong. Pelipper plus Ludi can definitely get very overwhelming for the opposing side. So definitely some really good pieces on Shuckle's end. Now from Haydun's end, I think Darkrai absolutely smokes. When talk about no ice resist on his team, Shuckle really doesn't have great dark resist on his team. It's going to be Greninja. And Mienshao. So I think like a Choice Specs angle is actually very, very viable potentially. Choice Specs, Life Orb, Evo, whatever you want to be. Black Glasses is also very, very good. Some kind of nasty plot stat can put in a lot of work. So definitely a really, really solid Pokemon in this matchup. I think SD Gliscor is probably your best angle for that Pokemon. I don't think that it sets up great hazards in this matchup. And it definitely gets revenge by a lot of the offense. But a lot of Shuckle's fatter things don't really appreciate an SD Gliscor, or at least a Gliscor that's just clicking knockoff and U-turn the entire game. I don't think you're going to really find the opportunity to set up hazards, but other than that though, you're going to do a lot of work and be a big nuisance to a ton of things on Shuckle's team. So definitely a solid Pokemon. I think Goodra, Sylveon, and Hitmontop are a really solid defensive core that should probably always come here. Sylveon is going to soft check a lot of the things on the team. If it's Spadef, it can check things like Blood Moon if it's not a setup variant, but it checks things like Mienshao, Greninja, Baxcalibur, Kilowattrel, Ludicolo outside of Rain, things like that. But it also passes fat wishes to other Pokemon that check those things even better. Things like Goodra, things like the Hitmontop, and even Gyarados if you end up bringing it to an extent. So I love the Sylveon, Hitmontop, Goodra defensive core a lot in this matchup in particular. Hitmontop really loves the wishes to stay healthy for Gren plus Bax. It's probably going to be like an AV Intimidate set or something similar. I think Serperior absolutely goes wild and can be really, really overwhelming. I think some kind of sub-Leech Seed set is probably what you end up go with. You can go with sub-Leech Seed, Leaf Storm, Dragon Pulse, and do a lot of damage. You got to be careful about a Scarf Bax hitting you with an Icicle Spear behind your sub. You got to make sure that it's in range of your Dragon Pulse before you click it behind your sub so it doesn't load a dice Icicle Spear and knock you out. But other than that, I mean, if you can sub-Leech down on something like Bronzong pretty quickly, as well as just Compound Boost on it, and everything else gets nuked by Leaf Storm plus Dragon Pulse. So really, really solid Pokemon overall in this matchup. And then, yeah, other than that, I am going to go in Shuckle's favor in this matchup. I think the likes of Gren, Bax, plus Blood Moon is just a little bit too overwhelming, and if Shuckle plays offense, so he was able to get into those big threats early on and do a lot of damage, I don't think Haydun's going to be able to weather the storm, unfortunately. Now, again, it's kind of dependent. I think if Shuckle brings, like, more, like, setup-oriented team, like something like a, DD or SD backs, I think he's going to struggle a little bit more, but if he brings in Bandit backs, breaks, and then SD Gren sweeps, I think he's going to take home this win this week. For our next matchup, we have Gator and his Florida Gators versus Kyle and his Miami Dawn fans. Now, from Gator's side, I think Bandit Hammerot goes, well, ham, I guess is a better way of saying it. Realistically, you just need Razor Shell, Ceaseless Edge, Aqua Jet, and Sucker Punch, and it's going to really, really do well into sand offense like this. You have great priority for both of the big threats on Kyle's team, as well as your dual steps just absolutely nuking. I mean, Clefable comes in once on a banded Razor Shell, and it no longer checks your Hammerot, and if it's not max Fizdef, it's going to get nuked by it, right? It's going to take a ton of damage. You can also rock with Flip Turn in one of those slots to punish that thing coming in so that you guaranteed to it KO with a Razor Shell next time, making your Ceaseless Edge a little bit more comfortable to click for your team. I also think that hazards from the Hammerot are like unguardable. We obviously have Spin and Drill, but Drill spinning is a little bit rough here in my opinion in this matchup. And Tentacruel is a terrible spinner into something like a Goldango on the other side. So Things to keep in mind, we could also go Air Balloon Gholdengo. Speaking of which, I think Gholdengo is pretty strong here. Gholdengo plus Dunsparce are great pivots into a lot of the team. I think like a SPF Gholdengo is going to be great in the likes of Latios and the likes of Clefable, and it's going to check them really well, as well as potentially just having a really strong dual stab into the team. You probably don't go Nasty Plot in this game just because there's not really a big point, but you can definitely go some kind of Thunder Waving set and really punish the likes of Moltres coming in on you pretty consistently. You gotta be careful about the bear, but if you chip the bear down with Make It Rains, it's not going to be around for a long time anyways, so something to keep in mind here. I think Zarude has great win potential if we can chip down the Clefable and we decide to go Trailblaze on that thing, or if we just go like a bulky Swords Dance set. It can absolutely wreck through a team like this and be really strong and powerful. I think Keldeo forces awkward Latios pivots and allows for like solid momentum into the rest of the team. We catch that thing with a flip turn, we're in a good spot, or we can click a really strong water or fighting move, force that thing into a potential recover turn and go from there. And if it's not a recovering Latios, you're just going to pick a KO after the first time because you're potentially putting that Latios in KO range after like rocks and, you know, sand and things like that from like a Specs Hydro Pump. I also really like the Specs Vacuum Wave option for the likes of the Excadrill, or like a setup T-Tar or something like that. So definitely really solid Pokemon. And then Donphan should probably come for spin here. The threat of opposing hazards on the other side is really obnoxious, as well as the fact that Excadrill needs a solid check, and really all you have is going to be something like Donphan. I think from Kyle's side though, we have Lati, which exerts a lot of pressure if it's Specs. Okay, we have solid soft checks and things like Dunsparce and Gholdengo. Gholdengo's one Shadow Ball away from getting kind of nuked, and Dunsparce does not take Specs Dracos. And other than that, I mean, Specs Draco is unbelievably free. Whimsicott is not known for its special defense either. It's known for its utility and dying to Latios hits if it ever tries to come in. So, gotta be very careful about that, and I think that means that Dracos and Psychics become incredibly free when the Gholdengo gets chipped or taken out of commission. I think Excadrill also has very big win potential in this game. Like I said, there really is only the Donphan that checks it well defensively. If we can get rid of the dual water priority or be out of range of it potentially, Excadrill goes absolutely insane in this matchup as a potential win condition, and cleaning up Understand. You probably don't get the opportunity to Swords Dance, but you can definitely do a lot of damage instead. I think Clefable is also very solid and needed to, not immediately sack something like Hammer on, but it could also be a little more specialty defensive and check the Keldeo, things like that. Other than that, I think some great Pokemon include things like Moltres, which pivot into a lot of Gator's offense, like especially defensive Moltres. Definitely seems really strong. But overall, I am going to lean Gator in this matchup. I think he just has the offense that matches up incredibly well into Sand offense. So definitely going to be a really fun one, though, to watch. Next up, we got a really exciting one in Pokeaimmd and his Los Angeles Wakers versus Nexus and his Toronto Tyrants. Now, from Joey's side, I think that Cinderace is basically unguardable in this matchup. Between the combination of Fire, Fighting, Rock, and U-Turn, there really is no answers. In Rock, I mean Smackdown, as it did get that recently, and it's a great coverage move for the random Talonflame and Moltres matchups you might have, and it's great in here in particular, because otherwise you're actually checked pretty well by Talonflame, so really solid. Speaking of Talonflame, if that thing ever does go down and gets caught by a Smackdown, I think that Scizor looks incredibly strong. Some kind of Swords Dance variant, maybe even a Choice Band set, maybe even some kind of Rocky Helmet set to check the Meowscarada, because you know you're going to get knocked off anyways. Can do really well in this matchup, and it's a great revenge killer to the likes of Meow, Kyurem, and Amorous, and things of the sort. Weakened Galvantula if it tears, and weakened Toxicroak even potentially. So definitely a really solid Pokemon in general. And again, priority offense is kind of the name of the game in this matchup. We already mentioned Scizor. I think Lycanroc is also very strong in this matchup and doesn't have great counterplay. The only rock resist on the team is going to be something like Ursaluna and Jirachi, which you can hit pretty hard with a neutral click in close combat into a lot of this team. Close combat's going to do a lot to Jirachi and 2-hit KO probably if it's not physically defensive. And Ursaluna is definitely getting 2-hit KO'd by a CC. And outside of that, Cell Rock is very free. And so is Stone Edge, Rock Blast, things like that. So really strong Pokemon overall. But even Big Billy, I know it seems crazy, but I do think there is a genuine Billy angle here, because the only normal resist on Nexus' team is going to be the Jirachi. We saw in his game against Gator last week that he really struggled with the Staraptor and switching into it because his Jirachi did not have the longevity to stay around and check that. And if it's not a FizzDef Jirachi specifically for something like that, Lycanroc and Scizor, I think he's going to have a rough time into Big Billy. So that could be really, really cool here. Now, outside of this, I also think that, not Overquill, Quillfish Hisui is also great. It's a decent enough Meowscarada check. It's probably going to get knocked off, but you could even potentially go Helmet because of that. It also sets up Spikes, and I think Spikes' priority offense is probably going to be Joey's way to go in order to win this game in a pretty rough matchup. Speaking of rough matchup, we'll look at Nexus' offense. I mean, first, Kyurem has no switch-ins consistently throughout the game. Something like Scizor obviously can pivot in a couple times, but that's a Specs Kyurem. I mean, how often is it switching in, right? I think there's also an angle for Scarf. There's also an angle for different resist barriers, whether it be Haydunn, Chople, whether it be Charty Berry, whatever it might be. I think it definitely is pretty solid regardless offensively. And Amorous also has no switch-ins. Again, Scizor switches into Moonblast, it gets blown up by a Mystical Fire and doesn't have reliable recovery this gen in Roost, so it's going to be really hard for something like the Scizor to switch into both Kyurem and Amorous. I think they're both really strong here. And then Meowscarada also has barely any switch-ins. It's only Quillfish. Quillfish gets knocked off and then you U-turn the rest of the game, and it's basically a non-factor. You U-turn, then you get into Amorous or you get into Kyurem and you click a button and you pick something off. I think Rachi is great defensively and do a ton of things. Again, in particular, that triple priority offense, I think it's a great check into that. So if you're a little bit more physically defensive, that's great. Or you can be more specially defensive and check something like Latios, which can definitely get out of hand in the wrong scenarios and things like that. And I think Galvantula is also really strong with potentially just Terra Electric in this game because you have Electric, Bug as your stabs, it's everything really hard, and then you just tech on E-Ball for the Swampert, and you'll go to town and do some work. You can also go Terra Ice, actually. Terra Ice is probably better offensively into the Thunderous because it resists your dual stab / is immune to one. So you can Terra Blast and pick that thing off. However, you do become weak to both Bullet Punch and Stealth Rock. So this is a thing to keep in mind. Then you have obviously Pokemon like Ursaluna and Blastoise, which serve as decent Pokemon here. Good spinner and Blastoise, and Ursaluna is just a nice pivot and kind of hit absorber / damage dealer in general. I am actually going to take Nexus in this matchup. I think his matchup is pretty darn incredible with his offense. Joey can obviously outplay and put himself in a good position with some pretty aggressive gaming, but he just doesn't have switch-ins to Nexus top 3, and Rachi is really solid into him, so I am going to lean Nexus in this matchup. On to the next, and we have a really fun matchup here in Emvee versus CBAD. Now, from Emvee's side, I think Annihilate can get really out of hand really fast, as per usual with Annihilate. I think if it gets some bulk ups going, it could be a pretty big problem. I also think Assault Vest is a viable angle here, just to not get absolutely nuked and revenged by the Scary Sun offense that can outspeed you and pick you off potentially. But again, if you're SPDF bulk up and you stay healthy enough, whether it be SPDF bulk up taunt, SPDF bulk up protect, to gain lefties, stall out Sun, things like that, it can really put in a ton of work and really break through this team or potentially win in the end game. I think Emvee or Haydunn Berry Raging Bolt also looks really good. Emvee lets it check a lot of the special offense on the opposing side, things like Venusaur, things like Mesprit, things like even Wake you'll live a hit from, but Haydunn is going to be a little bit better in luring both of its Paradox past brothers into clicking a Dragon move against it, living the hit, and then nuking it back with a Draco Meteor or Dragon Pulse of your own can be really helpful and nice. And Draco is pretty darn free in this game. When your water type is, or when your fairy type is Primarina and it's weak to electric, you can kind of click Draco the entire game and really have no drawbacks. And again, something like Mamba comes in, it's going to get nuked by an offensive Draco. So I think that Haydunn or Emvee looks really strong here. Speaking of dragon types, I think Terra Steel Flygon also has some great win potential and is really obnoxious for the likes of Pokemon like Mamoswine, which is good because Mamoswine is really good into this team, so that could be a potential really solid option as a revenge killer and a Pokemon that can switch in and pivot into that Pokemon. And I think Kleavor does really well because there's no rock resist on the opposing side at all. So Sonax is a very free attack, and rocks are going to be very important into Sun. Again, the gouging if it's not boots, chipping down things like Wake and Venu coming in and out, chipping down things like Corviknight coming in and out, chipping down the Ninetales so it has less switch-ins to set up the Sun. All very important things. Whether it be Scarf or Banded, I think both sets are going to be very solid. Now, from CBAD's side, holy gouging fire, this guy is broken. There's no fire resist on the team that takes the combination of fire plus dragon. I mean, really, it's only Raging Bolt. It's the only fire is just on the team, right? And if we come in hard on a Dragon Claw and Outrage, whatever it might be, a scale shot, we're going to take a ridiculous amount of damage. We're going to get to a KO. So that's something really, really important to note, is I think that Gouging Fire can probably just once again run a Choice Band set and click Flare Blitz in the sun and kill something. It can also be DD, it can also be boots and just like 3 attacks or 4 attacks and just kind of click buttons. But I think Bandit has some real viability if we can keep hazards off of the field. I think Wake grabs good flip turns into Empoleon, because Empoleon's a great Wake check, right? But Empo also gets nuked by the Gouging Fire in the sun, which gives you more opportunity to get in that guy. You even click a neutral mid-ground EQ, expecting maybe a Raging Bolt, because it's the only fire resist on the team. So I think that Wake is going to allow for a lot of momentum into that Pokemon, and then if Empoleon does not come or it goes down, I think it's actually very strong as well. Wake is really, really powerful in this matchup, and really hard for Emvee's team to kill in one hit as well, so something else to keep in mind. Speaking of Pokemon that go absolutely insane off of flip turns from Walking Wake, Mamoswine looks really good. You might want to tech on some fighting moves. I think it still gets superpower. If not, body press, whatever it might be, for the Terra Steel Flygon. That can definitely be annoying. But other than that, I mean, ground plus ice is good for a reason, right? There's a reason it's such a potent stab combination, and this matchup is no different. It really does go crazy, and it soft checks something like Bolt, to where you're not getting volted on, thunderclapped on, thunderbolted on for the entirety of the game. So that's obviously going to be really solid. I think for the Ape, you probably go some kind of Castleberry, Mesprit, some sort of offensive set, maybe a Thunder Wave and then Psychic. Maybe you just hit it with a really strong Psychic, but I think it's going to be a solid check in this matchup, as well as a good Rocker as well. Sets up rocks for the rest of the team, which is great. And then Venu has great win potential, in my opinion. I really do think he can go to town. And now you got to be careful of things like Weavile, but you have a great Weavile check in Primarina, and Primarina is just good in general in this matchup, right? So if you can, you know, deal with that accordingly, maybe get out rocks, your Force and Light Sword chip, whatever it might be, helmet on the axle, a ton of different options, right? And Venu can go absolutely crazy. Otherwise, definitely does really good. You probably want to be a Weather Ball variant for the Terra Steel Flygon, so you're going to be a little weather dependent, but doesn't mean that's bad, right? Because Sun is really strong here. I'm actually going to go CBAD in this matchup. I think that he has a really, really strong offensive matchup with the likes of the Paradox past Johto Beast, as well as Pokemon like Venusaur, Mamoswine, and then good defensive pivots in Mesprit, Primarina, Corviknight, things like that. So we are going to lean CBAD here. But before we jump into the next one, we do actually have CBAD with us for an interview this week, much like the one we did with Uzi last week. We'll kind of talk a little bit about his season, what he hopes for the future season, and talk about his matchup against Emvee. And yeah, let's go ahead and jump into that. Alrighty guys, here we are with the man of the hour. We're here with CBAD for a quick little interview. How are you doing today, man?
Hey, I am doing well. Thanks for having me. What's going on, SPL fans? Number one coach, CBAD Detroit Steel Wings here, baby.
Oh, there we go. So, this season has obviously only been going on for just a few weeks, but I wanted to ask, it's always my favorite question to ask, has there been any standout members for the season thus far? Most fun mons in practice, whether you're when you're building or you're mocking with, or just something in-game that's absolutely surprised you and how good it's been?
So, completely, and I say this, I said this in my draft analysis, I said it in the week battles that I brought it, first 2 weeks. I was talked into getting Greedent, right? If the fans were to see the initial draft and then the little 24-hour grace period that we have, I originally had Dunsparce, I believe, and swapped it out for Greedent. My friend Jack was like, Greedent's the best, like just run it. And I was like, all right, you know. You don't, you know, the guy that makes your thumbnails, you don't want to talk bad about his choices, because then, like, you know, your thumbnails don't look as good. No, I'm just playing. But anyways, so Greedent actually low key has been super fun. It's got like such a, and like they're like, this guy drafted Gouging Fire and he's talking about Greedent, but like for real, like Greedent, if you take a look at its stats, like it has so much bulk that you can just have so much fun with it. Cheek Pouch Citrus Berry just gives you a free life to set up, and then like if you curse your Swords Dance in front of something, like yeah, nothing like one shots it, right? Especially as a Terra captain, you know, being able to run either Terra Fairy or Terra Ghost. It's been super fun. I think it really held its own week 1 against Chimpact, and I think it definitely caught Shady off guard in week 2. I think it did its job in just getting some chip damage and put me in a better spot than I would have been otherwise. So that's probably been my you know, Gouging Fire does Gouging Fire things, right? Like I drafted it and I know it doesn't it doesn't wow me because I was already wowed by it. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But Greedent, that mon's been feisty. I love it.
I think it getting Swords Dance was actually big. I think it's become a lot more like immediately threatening. Like it's obviously always been fat and annoying, especially you can change the type and flip the weaknesses, but SD makes it a little bit more scary. Like, wait a minute, he can knock, he can body slam, he can EQ. What is it's also that normal type move pool that makes it really fun. So definitely a really cool mod for sure. Now, speaking of your team, you already talked about some preseason transactions. You made some big transactions in general to the team this week. Can you give us some insight onto why you made those changes, if it was maybe last week's game or just looking ahead at your schedule, or just some overall weaknesses you found in the build so far?
Yeah, for sure. I'm actually going to pull up my side of the document here. So I firmly believe that nobody ever makes one free agent transaction. You know, if you can never ever, unless you're somehow miraculously dropping like Pokeaimmd for Gardevoir or something, you can kind of get tit for tat in that case, but it's very hard to find something that fits that. So, yeah, I did make a lot of transactions going into week 3, and let me actually pull up the Discord here so that way I can talk about that. So effective week 3. So I dropped 5 and picked up 6. So I have a new team. You know, Galarian Weezing, originally going into the draft, it was Gouging Fire centralized. And I wanted Defogger support to help out with that because I didn't want to limit it to just boots, and also kind of type synergy as well. So Galarian Weezing was a good one. I just didn't feel like the way games are played these days. I really feel like hazard control is, if you're lucky to get a defog off, you do. Otherwise, you just kind of have to keep playing fast and hard.
So fast paced, yeah, 100%.
So a second defogger really just didn't seem too much. Miss Magius went, just unfortunate cause of, just got caught in the crossfire here because, again, you can't drop tit for tat, so you got to find which Pokemon maybe might fit so well as you start to build out that other half the team. Sandy Shock's very one-dimensional. I feel like after I got to try to build with it, it really was just kind of Spikes, Earth Power, Volt Switch, X move here. Hoopa Unbound I was really sad about. I was really excited to going into this to draft Hoopa Unbound, but I really felt like someone just brings a Scarf U-turn and I'm gone every week. So like if I can position myself.
Yeah, it's a really hard mon to fit onto any one team too. It's always that 7th mon, it feels like, getting Hoop on the squad.
It is. I mean, you run your Banded Hyperspace Fury, you run, Spec Psychic, whatever you want to do, but all you need, and it's base 80 speed. Like there's so many Pokemon that sit above that can just click U-turn it and it's gone. So I really wanted to try to fit it out, but I just couldn't run with it. And unfortunately, Hisuian Lilligant, I know the fans are probably going to hate me for it. Hisuian Lilligant did its best, and its best was not enough 2 weeks in a row. I still don't have the chest hair to go back and look at Chimpact side to see the HP stat of where he was, but I will stand by that was a very close roll in my favor, and I didn't get it. And then the 12% miss on Leaf Blade against Shady's team, really just 2 weeks back to back did not set me up well. That's the game we play. There's damage rolls for a reason. There's accuracy for a reason. But 2 weeks in a row, we got to change things up.
You want to minimize those chances if at all possible, for sure. You play the odds to your favor at the very least.
Exactly. So in return off of those, kind of rebuilding the team back up, I did pick up Venusaur as a alternate sun abuser outside of our 2 Paradox Dragons with the Photosynthesis. I think it's very immediately threatening with Chlorophyll, just dropping Life Orb for attacks in front of something, being able to set up with growth, or not bringing Sun. It can act as a defensive backbone necessarily with things like Synthesis, Leech Seed, Black Sludge, whatever that looks like. It can be a little bit more dimensional than Hisuian Lilligant as a Sun Sweeper. Mesprit adds some good bulk to the team, adds an alternate rocker after giving up Sandy Shocks, which I really do like. It had nothing to do with the Mystic Power Azelf that Shady brought, and I just thought I need a Mystic Power. Like, nothing to do with that. Just, 80 HP, 80 speed, and then 100 all around. That's fair for
such
10
a good
points.
utility, man. Yeah,
it's a pretty good, good ground immunity as well with Levitate. So even though we're losing that with Galarian Weezing, we're bringing it back onto the team with Mesprit. So again, we're trying to pick up what we lost, but in a different way. I was shocked Mamoswine went undrafted, completely honestly.
Especially with Gator in the draft, man. Everybody was waiting for that pick, and it just didn't happen. Mamo's one of those Pokemon that just it's on the list of things to prep for. Sometimes, there's a low tier mon where you're like, yeah, he's not going to bring it. He's not going to bring it. Mamoswine's like, I'm going to get punished if I don't prep for it. So the fact that it went undrafted was crazy. I really wanted to try to build around getting Mamoswine onto the team. Really, just a very strong ground type in general. So I wanted to grab that.
Primarina replaces the fairy typing that we lost in Galarian Weezing as well. Acts as a more defensive water type than Walking Wake necessarily can, but just hits it's super hard. I mean, it's got 126 base special attack. Liquid Voice is super cool. I think just some really nice tech is just changing the Psychic Noise to a water type move with Liquid Voice, just to get the combo stab alongside the limited healing on the other side. I thought that was really nice. And then with the remaining points, I had about 10 points left in there. I liked the idea of getting more Terra Captains than just green at Miss Magia, so grabbed Electrode. Fast electric types really always do well in the format. I think Electrode is a little underwhelming offensively, but it's just so fast, you can't top it. So Terra Electric, Terra Ice, and Terra Grass I think is very standard. You got your ice coverage for your nice ground types, you got your grass coverage for a little bit of defensive check there. And then Shiftry as another Terra Captain and as a Sun Abuser, having access to Chlorophyll. Dark is really great for just the strong knockoffs there. Ground coverage and flying coverage, I think, just make things a little bit harder to prep for, depending on if it is a dual scenario where either one of them could do well. I think both of those make it just a little bit harder to prep for. And also Under the Sun, it does pick up what we left with Hisuian Lilligant with a very, very fast defogger if we did need it.
100%. I think the Weezing drop in particular really helped. It freed up a lot of points. That, Hoopa, things like that. I think the changes were actually incredible for your team. It's a whole new team, as you can see, and I liked the build before, but I think the team is very much so improved. So definitely some big ones. Now, obviously, we're feeling good. We got a whole new team under our belt, and we're playing Emvee week 3, which will be really, really a good time. Can you give us some insight into your building process, or how you approach the matchup, building against a great player, obviously, but obviously a very unconventional player and builder?
Oh yeah, I've never won against Emvee, so I'm going in just balls to the wall with craziness. Quite honestly, not necessarily craziness, but just probably something hopefully a little unorthodox. We've got some more standard Pokemon going into this season or into this week than we do. Maybe, but I do have some Pokemon that I hope really kind of catch them off guard a little bit. So the game plan is just lead Gouging Fire and just do everything in my power that I can to really just den as many holes as I can for the rest of the team to come in. Now, granted, I really don't want to go up against like a Scarf Flygon lead or like a Cleaver lead, really. Those are really the only 2 out of the 12 Pokemon that I have that I'd probably switch out on, but I think Gouging Fire outside of that, just so naturally bulky, just being able to go for like a Dragon Dance and just start hitting things really hard. Turn 1 is the plan. Electrode I think does really, really well with the speed tier. I think Terra Ice is really nice just to be able to hit the things like the Raging Bolt as well. I've got Taunt on there this week just in case to prevent any sort of like bulk up from Annihilate or anything along those. If Mew is crazy and wants to do something like there. Pretty standard Corviknight. He's got Weavile, so I want to make sure I can take hits from that. So pretty standard on there. I've learned recently through VGC that Farigiraf is a monster, so a little bit more specially defensive on Mesprit this week with rocks. Really kind of mixed bulk leaning more towards especially defensive. Trailblaze Loaded Dice Mammo is one of the sets that I'm bringing this week. Thank you. I really, Trailblaze and then the EQ knockoff Icicle Spear with the Loaded Dice, I'm hoping is, it just does a lot of work. After Gouging Fire does poke some holes, Mamoswine helps to kind of clean that up. And then really what I'm hoping does really well is Primarina natively slow. I am bringing the Liquid Voice with Moonblast, Ice Beam, and Psychic Noise, so I limit the healing but still get my water coverage. It's holding Blunder Policy and is running Sing.
Oh, we're trying to get some... Oh, wow, look at that.
So, yeah, that's what I'm saying. So, 55% of the time I get a Pokemon to sleep, and that's fine. Sleep's never a bad thing. And then 45% of the time, I now have a Primarina that outspeeds my opponent's entire team. And just drops nukes with, max special attack modest. So that's the heat. That's the sauce going into this weekend. You have to be unconventional when going up to play Emvee. Big thing. I just got done watching Haydunn side. Weakness policy, acrobatics Gliscor for the Annihilate. Like that's a perfect example of you just need to... You just have to build unconventionally in order to catch him off guard. He's just so good at the game, you have to.
Oh, 100%. I like the offense-centric approach you're taking. Like, I actually just recorded the part of the video where I was talking about your guys' matchup, and you talked about Gouging Fire lead. I mean, Fire Resist are both dual dragons, and obviously one of them probably tears into a steel type potentially to take on something like the Mamoswine or not die to it. So Flare Blitz is an absolute nuke on the team. So I really like the offense-centric approach. Get in big heavy hitters, hit hard, and hopefully overwhelm him. Don't give him time to do what he wants to do and set up the, wonky end games.
You can't, man. Yeah. He will take advantage of that in a heartbeat. I mean, that's what you have to do, especially, coming out of Sword and Shield and being off for 3 years. I think getting back into draft with SPL, I think the last season's picks with stuff like Ogerpon and Iron Bundle forced me to play a little bit more offensively than I would have. And I think initially I drafted this team in a little bit more of a balanced manner. And that's just really not the style right now, especially with, so many lower tier mons all of a sudden becoming viable, like Greedon, like Arbalava. I mean, just a lot of these Pokemon that wouldn't normally even be in the room are all of a sudden the ones giving lectures. So
100%.
I'm hopeful, you still want your checks where you can, but you really have to run like this takes physical hits, this takes special defensive hits, the rest of these nuke.
Yeah, it's all about pivoting and offensive positioning in Gen 9, 100%. It's such an offensive metagame. There's never been another generation where you can't play balance, semi-still, or anything like that, or you're at almost a disadvantage. So definitely really, really offensive metagame. Now, for this season, obviously, the SPL's roster is insane. You've had some crazy matchups. Week 1, you had Chimpact. Week 2, you got to play Shady in his return to draft. Week 3, you're playing up against Emvee. So you've had a pretty exciting start to your season. Is there anybody going forward that you're most excited to play after this, or anybody that was left off of your schedule that you're hoping you meet up with in playoffs?
So coming up into the future weeks. So week 4, I do play Shuckleking. I did get the chance to play Shuckleking back in season 1. So looking forward to that rematch. I've had the chance to play Joey before in the quarterfinals of last season.
Oh, Max Spadef Thundy.
Max Spadef Thundy, nightmarish.
Oh, man.
I would say the two people I am looking forward most to facing are the two people that I haven't played in last regular season. So first off, being last season's runner-up in Uzi. I mean, he's absolutely cracked. That's near the end of the season. I'm gonna need to pull off some good team building in order to take him on. But really, week 5, I end up playing Gator, and I have not had the pleasure of playing Gator since like Ultra Sun and Moon, I want to say. The Swish season's all just a blur, but it has been quite a long time, and he's off to an impressive streak. 2-0 coming right out the gate after not playing in years.
He was beating people, looking up what mons were doing in the team builder. You can see the guys. He just got that natural skill. He's like, "Oh, what does this thing do? Oh, I'm good." It was pretty insane.
It's mind-boggling. So as much as I might get absolutely clapped in both those matches, I am looking forward to both of them.
Oh, 100%. Definitely some really, really exciting ones. Again, that's the cool thing about this Legacy season is there's a lot of people coming back that you haven't played in a while and stuff like that. So definitely really, really fun. Now, lastly, do you have any final words that you want to, send off the video on going into, the game against Emvee this weekend?
Going into the game against Emvee, listen, man, there's only room for one cook in this kitchen, and it's me. Emvee, you better watch out. I'm coming for you, big dog.
You heard it here first on Draft Notes. Very, very heated words here from Mr. CBAD. I appreciate you coming on, bro. Thank you for talking with me today, and good luck in your game, of course.
Thank you for having me. You have a good one.
Thank you. For our second to last matchup of the day, we have Uzi and his Thunderclap Titans versus Leo and his Carolina Haxorus. Now, from Uzi's side, I think that Pult looks really strong if it clicks the right button. Now, that's easier said than done, right? Click Shadow Ball when the Tinkaton comes in, click Draco Meteor when the Overquill comes in. But if he can do so, it looks incredibly threatening. And if he can find ways of chipping down that Overquill by maybe forcing it in with the Chiyu or something they'll like, it makes Shadow Ball super, super free in this game, as the immunity is going to be something like Cinccino, which isn't really a real Dragon Ball switch in, obviously. I think it also looks even stronger if we can get in Pokemon like Deoxys and spike up and really whittle down that Ogerpon and do a ton of damage to it, especially being that the main spinner in Great Tusk, obviously, is probably going to be checked by the Deoxys. It's probably going to be the check to the Great Tusk, in particular switch it, and that's when we get up our spikes. So if we can find that opportunity, we're going to go ahead and get up pretty consistent spikes. We can also use Dio in especially defensive way to check something like Iron Bundle, but it kind of depends on the team structure that Uzi wants to go for. Both ways are completely viable, in my opinion. I think that Dark Pulse from the Chi-Yu is super, super free because Qwilfish, or Overquill, sorry, I keep mixing them up today, cannot switch into that Fire move, and vice versa. I think Fire move is pretty darn free because the Fire immunity, or Fire resist, is going to be something like Manaphy, which cannot switch in on a Dark Pulse. I think Scarf looks really, really strong because of that. It's also going to outspeed a Rapid Spun or Booster Tusk, which is great, and it's going to outspeed the entirety of the team, obviously, without a Scarf. So that's going to be a really, really important thing. I think that Scarf Chi-Yu looks really, really powerful, especially if you can keep rocks away with the like of our Iron Treads. Now, I think you're probably going to be Assault Vest in this game because it's going to allow you to, randomly take on hits from like something like a Heat Waving Zapdos, which you don't actually have great pivots into Zapdos on Uzi's team at all, unless you're a more specially defensive Deoxys. You really actually don't switch into it at all. It also let you live a hit from Bundle, and if you are rocking Stone Edge for the Zapdos, you're going to do a lot of damage to Bundle, maybe pick it off after Rock, depending on how offensive you are. But you're going to be a great spinner. You're going to pivot into the Spiker and Overquill really well as well, which is great. Definitely a really strong Pokemon, honestly, in my opinion, and it checks the Zapdos, which is the main thing, because that thing is really, really threatening here. I think AV Azu also isn't terrible. It's going to eat one hit naturally from the likes of Bundle, and it's also going to be able to potentially take on something like Manaphy if we're like an offensive AV set. We can kind of avoid a 2-hit KO from Energy Ball, or EV to live a +3 Energy Ball from a Tail Glow set, and just click Play Rough twice and hopefully pick it off, which is obviously really, really strong and hopefully, solid here. And then I think a fatter Okidogi is a potential option for the Ogerpon, because Ogerpon looks really, really scary. Maybe some kind of helmet set, maybe some kind of Black Sludge set, maybe pretty physically defensive. Oki's really, really bulky on the Physdo side. It's going to allow us to check that Ogerpon pretty well. Persian is also an option in doing so. With Foul Play, you're going to be able to prevent that thing from setting up pretty freely, and you'll kind of be able to grab momentum and things like that into the rest of the squad, which can be potentially really, really valuable. So definitely a really solid Pokemon overall. Now, from Leo's side, I think that Bundle is very, very strong here if it is a Fizz deal. We already mentioned if he wants to go Spadef for the Bundle, he can definitely do so. Otherwise, though, I think he can pretty freely be Specs Bundle and do a ton of damage to this team and just kind of click Ice Beam / Hydro into the whole squad. I mean, I guess Freeze Dry as well if Azu is there, but it's also really, really difficult for Azu to ever really come in on that, so you can kind of click Ice Beam pretty freely. So definitely a really solid Pokemon here. I think Ogerpon is a great endgame option with the Trailblaze set. Again, really the only check I can see in my mind is going to be something like the Okidogi, maybe something like a Deoxys if it's not rocking out with the Swords Dance as well. But that's all things to keep in mind. You really just need a little bit of chip on the offense like the Dragapult and the Chi-Yu, and you can kind of set up a pretty solid endgame. I think Manaphy is also incredibly strong with the Tail Glow set. I think get really, really overwhelming. You could be a Rindo Berry variant for the Shaman to be able to take a Seed Flare from that thing and Ice Beam it. You could be a Citrus Berry, you could be Leftovers, you could be a ton of different things, honestly, on it. It definitely looks really, really strong. And then I also think that Apple is probably your best option when it comes to Terra. With Terra, you can check the Chi-Yu decently with Thick Fat, and be a pretty decent Spadef monster and, switching that. Otherwise, we mentioned the Pokemon like Tinkaton and Overquill that are definitely going to be solid in spiking and rocking, checking things like Pult and just being an overall nuisance. Overall, I am going to go Uzi over Leo, in this matchup. I just think his top-end offense is so unbelievably strong, and he has great pivots into a lot of Leo's initial offense. I think Leo's going to have to find a way of getting up hazards and keeping them up and really, really keeping the pressure on Uzi's team and not letting him get that front foot. Then our last match of the day, we have PlayMore Esports versus Chimpact and his Philadelphia Fearos. Now, from PlayMore side, nice Fairy Resist there, Chimpact. It doesn't exist. Our Fairy Resist on the opposing side are going to be the likes of Reverum, which does resist Fairy pretty well, but dies to close combat pretty much. And then Arcanine, which does resist Fairy, but dies to close combat. So your combination of your dual step are absolutely insane. I think a physical set is probably best. I really like Choice Band. I might be just a Choice Band Valiant truther, though. I think it's a really, really immediately threatening set. There is an idea for like a spec set as well. Definitely looks pretty okay in this matchup, but I like the physical variant. I think it definitely does really, really solid. And does a ton of damage with close combat into this team. Very reliable damage with close combat Spirit Break. So, depends on how you want to approach it. I'd probably go Banded, but I also think that Specs is pretty solid too. Specs might be a little bit better for Dozo, Iron Hands, things like that. So, it just depends on the route you want to go. I think that Chomp Spikes is great here. Spikes in general is really, really important in my opinion. Whittling down all of the fat on Chimpact's team. Iron Hands, Tinglu, Ogerpon doesn't appreciate spikes, Dondozo, all these fat nuisances getting whittled down by spikes is going to be really, really important for the likes of your rest of your offense in Valiant and the few other Pokemon we'll mention here to really do the work that they want to. I really like Terra Glastrier here. I think an SD variant is going to be really hard for Chimp's team to kill and really hard for him to pivot around correctly. I think a Terra Fairy set is probably your best bet. Does a ton of damage, and again, the Fairy Resist are very limited. The Fairy Resist realistically that takes it on is going to be something like Reverum, I guess, but you got high horsepower for it and Arcanine. Both of those guys died to that. So Terra Blast, high horsepower, and then probably just Icicle Crash or Icicle Spear in order to break through D-Knight's multiscale is going to be pretty darn strong. You can also go Terra Electric for the likes of Dondozo, but I also don't think Dondozo is the greatest Pokemon on paper into this team, especially when we have Pokemon like Amoonguss and potentially Electrode in the back. Now, I think Amoonguss is definitely solid here. Outside of Tornadus, it really does just serve as a big nuisance to this team. It's physically defensive. I think it's like Spore stats, Spore, Foul Play, Giga Drain, Sludge Bomb looks really, really powerful in this game. It's incredibly obnoxious. If there's not safety goggles in that Torn, it's a pretty darn free Spore. You Sludge Bomb and Giga Drain do a lot of things, and then you have Foul Play to prevent any kind of setup shenanigans from things like Reverum, from things like Dragonite, and things of the sort. So definitely a really solid Pokemon. And I think Jugulis with a booster speed has the potential to win later on, or a Choice Specs variant. I think Choice Specs is also very, very strong here. Now, from Chimpact's side, I think that safety goggles Torn is really strong and kind of bullies the Amoonguss. Amoonguss really be annoying, honestly, if you aren't safety goggles Torn, right? You come in, you caught with that Spore, your Torn's basically dead, right? It's going to be really hard to position against all the offense on this team. But if we're safety goggles, we come in for free every single time with that Amoonguss, and we immediately put on a lot of pressure with just the combination of flying plus fire. Does really, really well into this team. Really, there isn't much switching, so I think that's a potential option here. You could either be Nasty Plot, you could be a knockoff variant, you could just U-turn around, but really, really solid Pokemon. I like Nasty Plot safety goggles a lot, though. I think if you chip Garchomp, Terra Reverum smokes. It like super wins with a shift gear up and does really, really well with the Terra Fire, potentially with ground coverage for the likes of Ceruledge. And outside of that, I mean, you can go like Iron Head or Gunk Shot in the last slot and do a ton of damage. Probably Gunk Shot if I had to guess for the Vaporeon. But if you can get boosted up, you can do a lot of damage to a team like this if you chip down that Garchomp. So really, really solid Pokemon here. I think Iron Hands is also really scary with an SD and whatever Resist Berry you think is most appropriate, whether that be a Fairy Berry, which is Roselli, whether it be a Shuckleberry, whether it be a Pyapa Berry, whether it be, I mean, really that's it. I would probably go Roselli in this game, and an SD3 attack set goes absolutely crazy. You can even be a Punching Glove set, and just kind of know that you're going to live from Chomp, SD up, not take any helmet or anything like that. Same thing with the likes of Amoonguss, but realistically you can go just kind of Drain Punch, Ice Punch, and what last move would you really need? Drain Punch, Ice Punch, Thunder Punch? Probably. You should probably go Stab when you get it to +2, do a ton of damage. Really, really solid Pokemon overall. I love me some Hands, though. That's the greatest Draft League Pokemon in the world. I think Tingluski sets up crazy hazards on the team as well. Something like Cyclizar is not good. It's not going to come into the Drifblim matchup as well, because if Drifblim comes, it's never spinning, so I don't think there's any point in bringing Cyclizar. It seems very passive, not very good, does not force much progress in this. Plus, you could just come in with Tinglu after and set up hazards again. And if you get up those spikes, Pokemon like Torn, Hands, Reverum, and even Ogerpon look really strong. Speaking of Ogerpon, if there's no Amoonguss or you kill Amoonguss, Ogerpon also smokes in this game. Arcanine also gets one every single time it comes in. There's not a switch into Head Smash on this team outside of something like Metagross and Garchomp. And again, if we chip Garchomp, we're in a good spot, right? And we catch a thing with a Player F potentially as well. I'm like 99% sure he gets Player F too, so solid mod. And in general, the main thing with Chimpact's team that I like so much about it is there is room for every single Pokemon on this team. We didn't mention a couple things here. We didn't mention D-Knight, which is good here. We didn't mention Drifblim, Dozo, Comfey. All of them have viability and options in this matchup in particular. And I think because of that and because of how good a lot of his top tiers are and how scary their offense plus their I always take one hit potential is, I am going to lean Chimpact in this matchup over Playmore. And that is basically going to be SPL Week 3. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below about who's going to win, what game you're most excited for, who you guys want on for an interview next. Again, big thank you to CBAD for joining me for 15 minutes there and talking about Pokemon and the games. I love doing the interviews. I think they're a lot of fun. Let me know who you guys want to see next. I'd love to continue to do them, and I want to make sure I'm getting people on here that you guys want to hear from. Maybe it's because there's a cool matchup coming up or something like that. But yeah, with that being said, Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, drop a like if you enjoyed, sub if you're new. We're on our way to 5,000 subs, and I would really appreciate it a ton if you help us out along that journey. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.